video about using photographs and scans and how you can sort of clean those up in Photoshop to use in your designs. Now you might use photographs of something that you've made by hand, so it might either be a drawing or some sort of sculpture or some sort of 3D object. It could be 3D typography, or you might be scanning designs, sketches, whatever. Sometimes some things are too big to scan, or they are just too 3D or too awkward to scan in. So this is where you would want to be taking a really high quality photograph, and then obviously you're going to have to look at cleaning that up in Photoshop a little bit to make it worth using. So I've done another video on sort of like editing handmade stuff, which covers some of this, but I just wanted to look specifically at actually photographs as well. So what I've got here are 3 images of 3D typography that has been made. So you can see we've got one here that's made out of things found on the beach. It's on a white background, and then we've got 2 here that are made out of sweets, and they're on black backgrounds. Now, because of the size of this, actually this was taken in 2 parts, this one on the black background. So you can see they've got the first photograph that they took, and then the second photograph in order to get the whole alphabet. Now obviously what happens there is when you don't take a whole image in one go, you start to get differences in lighting. You might move the camera, you might change your settings, or it might go out of focus. So we've had a lot of issues actually with this image here, because this is a lot less clear than the top half, and the warmth of the lighting has completely changed. So there's a couple of things there that are going to be a bit of an issue. We'll start with the easy one first. So I'm going to drag that onto my Photoshop document, and we'll just hide that one for now. I've just got an A3 document here. You can do this on any size. I would most likely be wanting to use this for a poster of some sort. So obviously when I put that on a white background, you can see that actually this background isn't white because of the lighting or because of the camera settings. We've got this blue tint to it. So the first thing I'm going to do is go to my image, adjustments and levels, and I'm just going to up the contrast a little bit. So you can see that takes a dark. This is sort of your mid-ground, and then this is your lighter areas. So I'm going to brighten the lighter areas, and I'm also going to use my sort of mid point there to sort of get that a bit better. Now that's worked for us so far. That's pretty good, but you can see we've still got some blue bits here. So this is where the image is maybe darker, or there's a shadow, or there's something else going on that's causing for those blue bits to sort of hang around. So you want to just play around until you get something you're happy with. Obviously I don't want my image to fade out too much because it's going to start to look a little bit weird. So I'm probably going to go around there so that I get rid of most of it, but then I can go back in and have a proper look and get rid of the rest. Now you can see we've got this sort of blue tinge here. So one thing you could do is if you rasterize this image, I could go in with my eraser and I could start deleting that, which is fine, but it can get a bit sort of effort, it can take quite a while and it can get quite annoying after a while. The other thing you can do is go to your magic wand and you can sort of try and magic wand these bits out. Now you can see that's sort of done it, but it's avoided some of these key bits, because if I press delete now, it's not getting rid of everything, and I would have to go back and select that separately. And you can see if I select that colour there, it's actually going to start to delete out parts of my other images. So if I do Command D, you can see what it's done there, it's deleted some of that. So if I just Command Z, now we've got something here which is called tolerance. So tolerance is how picky the magic wand is. So if I put it on a really high tolerance and I select the blue, you can see it starts to pick up loads more of the image. So it's going, okay, you want this blue bit, but you want everything that's sort of close to that blue as well. So it's picking up loads and loads of colours. If I take the tolerance back down to something like 10 and I try it again, you can see it's being less picky, it's picking up less areas. So it's being more specific about the bits that it chooses. So it's being a lot sort of pickier and going, oh, well, you only want that shade of blue, or you only want this bit, etc. You can see I've also got contiguous unticked. So what that means is if it's not selected, it will select that colour everywhere that it can find it in the image. So it's looking over the whole image to find that colour. If I have contiguous selected, it will only find that area that is connected to itself. So it'll only go, okay, this must be the bit you want because it's all near each other. So understanding the magic wand tool, understanding things like tolerance and contiguousness, and understanding why you use those makes it a little bit easier. So I can go back in now and I can delete out those bits. So I think in some areas you might want to use the magic wand tool, and in other areas you might want to use the eraser for bits that are a little bit awkward. Now I always find the best sort of thing to do is to go through like this, and then once you've done, have a good look at it. So do Command D to get rid of any of those marching out wiggly lines. Have a good look, and you can see here I've missed a bit there, so that's not great. So that is when I go back, get my eraser tool, and I just neaten that up because I can see that quite clearly. And you can just go through and check the image. Now obviously this is not a very high quality photograph, so you would want an original photograph from a decent camera, a DSLR, rather than your phone, so that you're getting a high quality. This is why we scan stuff, because we know it's going to come in at 300 dpi, we know it's going to be a good size. I've also got, obviously this is made out of objects from the beach, so there's loads of sort of like bits of sand or debris or whatever that sort of ended up on the paper. And we don't want that because this is a white background, so we want a nice clear background. So again, you might go with your eraser tool and just look for any little bits that are still remaining and just neaten that up and get it how you want it. So you can see now that looks a lot clearer, it looks a lot nicer. We've not got anything in our background, so if I then wanted to use this and I wanted to spell something out, like the word C or something, I could then go in, copy and paste that out, and I could start to take the bits that I want and work with them. So you can start to move these around and explore. Because we've not got our background in there, because we've magic wanded it out, it makes it a lot easier. Obviously, if we'd left our background in there, we might have to do something like multiply. So for example, if I put a blue background in here, like that, you can see that doesn't look so great because we've got bits missing and we've got all sorts going on. Whereas if I set that maybe to multiply or something else, we get some different effects, and something like that's quite interesting where it changes it into a blue colour. That's really quite nice. You could do that yourself. You could go to Hue Saturation and colorise the image. So there's loads of different things you can start to do. It doesn't have to look perfect. You can just play around. We could go for a really bold blue, take the saturation right up, and then we could set that to multiply. And you can see that that starts to look a little bit more interesting then. So think about how you use these things. Obviously that's nice and simple, so all we've done is change the levels to increase the contrast. If you need to magic wand any parts out, do, but be careful. If you need to erase things out, again, make sure you know what size your eraser is. You probably want the hardness up unless you're going very close to an edge. Now, the hardness here is how sort of bold that edge is. So if I show you there, that's a very clean, crisp edge. Whereas if I actually take the hardness down and do it again, we get a softer edge. So you can see there's more blurring compared to that edge. So it blurs the edge out. So if I wanted to sort of go around this, a softer edge would look much more natural than a very hard edge. Can you see? So think about the hardness and the softness of that. Think about how it applies to the background. Think about what you're putting behind it. Use your polygonal lasso to start to take letters out from it. And that's how you can use something like that nice and clearly. Now I'm going to bring in this image here. So we've got these two parts. So we've got this bottom bit and then we've got the top bit. So I'm actually just going to separate those out so that we can work with them separately. Now naturally, if this was from an original image, you would have those as two separate files. So there we go. Now the first thing we need to think about is, well, let's start with this top one. So this top one's going to be a little bit more easy. So that's going to be very similar to the first image where we just need to do our levels. And again, we're just going to darken the background so that we get a nice flat back and it feels all one colour. Again, we can improve that a little bit more because we've still got sort of like the highlight here that we don't really want. And I'm actually just going to bring the light up to try and bring out the colour of the sweets. So again, this is very much trial and error. Getting it how you want it. So I'm going to leave it there. Now if I put a black background in, or I could always eyedrop a colour from the image. So actually if I want to go for that colour, which might be black or it might be a slight, maybe a bluer tinge, then that's going to really help me because it's going to help fade this into the background. So if I put that in there and go like that, you can see that looks a lot more natural. I could go with my eraser and I could go on a very soft edge and make it bigger. And I could sort of go to my image layer, so that's that one, and sort of fade Now you can see that works at the top where it's darker, doesn't necessarily work down here where it's much lighter, so that's not really working. So that's where you might go back and take the levels up a little bit. It's all about trial and error, all about trying to figure out what's going to work for you. You might in the end actually just magic wand the background out, but again, making sure you understand where your settings are at and what it's taking out. And you can see that does look a lot better. Now this one, even if I take my levels up, we're not going to get the same effect because we've got a very different tone in the image. So we've got a very, very different thing going on. So what we need to do is fix that first. So the top one had a much more blue kind of tint to it. So this is where you would go to your hue saturation. And I'm actually just going to add a little bit of a blue tinge to this. So a tiny little bit. I'm going to take the darkness down a little bit. You could also do colour balance. So colour balance is a lot more sort of in-depth. So it lets you look at the shadows, so specifically the darker areas, and then you can make those parts of the image darker. So you can see I'm changing the background, but I'm not necessarily making all the yellow sweets blue. So that for me feels a lot better. So that feels a lot more sort of how the other image was before, maybe even that a little bit. So you might do this before you get started. So now that I've done that, if I then do levels again, so image adjustments and levels, we should get something a lot closer. So there we go. So you can see that is much closer now. It's a little bit dark, so you might go back to your levels and just bring the lightness out in it so that we get some really bright areas. Obviously, because of how we've taken the image, we know it's naturally a bit darker, we know it's naturally a little bit less quality. This is where you might magic wand your background out so that you can see what you're working with, and make sure that you've got something that you're happy with. Again, that image is a little bit big actually. If you look at the size of the sweets on the top row, it doesn't quite fit in. So we're almost there. It's not perfect, but we're getting it looking a little bit more like it belongs, a little bit more like it's part of the same picture. I think that has got more contrast in it than this one. So again, you could go back to your levels. You could do auto tone or auto contrast, and those things might just help you a little bit. You can see that's brought the whites out for me. So there we have something that looks a lot more sort of convincing, and just feels a bit more like it should do. So nice and easy, using your levels to increase the contrast, using hue saturation where possible, using your colour balance, and using that shadows, midtones, highlights to choose which part of the image you actually want to change the colour of. So it's a really useful tool. So if I go back to it, the colour balance here, if you select the shadows, it will apply this to the shadows in the image. If you set the highlights to the lightest area of the image, it will apply these colour blends to that part of the image. So it is a really important tool. Obviously using your layer blend modes where that's appropriate, putting a flatter background in so that you've got something to work off. You might magic wand the background out, and we're just looking for this really clean, crisp, sort of nice, pretty design by the end of it. So you can do this with anything. It tends to work best if you're taking a photograph of a singular object, or objects like this where we've made typography out of things, and just making it so it's nice and clean and crisp so that it's ready to be used in a design of some sort and it's nice and tidied up.